Welcome to Caltrans LSIT LS Exam Preparation Course. One aid in your preparation for California licensure examinations. A word of caution, don't use this course as your only preparation. Devise and follow a regular schedule of study which begins months before the test. Work many problems in each area, not just those in this course's workbook, but problems from other sources as well. This course is funded by Caltrans, but you and I owe a profound thanks to others, the course's instructors, from the academic community, the private sector, other public agencies, and from Caltrans as well. We wish you well in your study toward becoming a member of California's professional land surveying community.
A diligent, thorough, and complete search for all evidence is the fundamental essence of land surveying. Curtis M. Brown.
Welcome to the Boundary Determination module of the Caltrans Video Training Course. I am Robert McComb. I entered the land surveying discipline during my summer months as a student at the University of California, where I studied physics. Later, I became an employee at private surveying firms, acquiring my professional license in 1977. Since then, I have owned and operated a private cadastral surveying company in a small mountain community in Southern California. During the 80s, I wrote exam problems and also served as an examiner. Today, I'm going to introduce to you, in the form of a story, the fundamentals of boundary surveying through the adventures of a fictitious survey party. Throughout my presentation, I will comment on their discovery process and the evidence they gather. Their mistakes will be instructive, their decisions issues for debate. Surveying is not usually as difficult as you will observe. Not usually, I say, because sooner or later every surveyor experiences a similar story. This lesson is not just a listing of boundary principles with a picture to go with each. That would be less than desirable. You would learn little to help you pass the exam and little to carry forward into your career. The professional exam demands that you demonstrate expertise. The test does not reward the amateur's ability to memorize a list of facts. The test will require you to solve problems exemplary of real life. The problems will require a synthesis of research, evidence, knowledge of principles and decisions, which, if they were made in the real world, would make you financially liable. Let's experience some boundary principles in the surveyor's true environment. I will begin with a series of definitions, and then I will proceed to the survey of the Sundance Ranch. Watch carefully, there will be a test later. Boundary retracement is the essential task done by surveyors. A boundary is defined by a deed. Retracing a boundary involves a reconstruction of the conditions and directives that originally set down the legal description contained in the deed. A legal description is like a map without lines and arrows, although sometimes it may refer to an actual map. When a map is referenced, a legal description may be greatly clarified. To illustrate these various terms, consider the following description of buried treasure and follow it on the map shown. Beginning at the grave, thence pace due west until the palm tree comes into view. Thence go 200 paces in the direction of the shipwreck to the X marked upon the sand. Dig down 4 fathoms. This example has all the trappings we need to demonstrate a modern boundary retracement. To find the buried treasure, we would follow the courses provided, using the map to help us interpret the terms given. This map and description is fine, provided the treasure has been freshly buried, the description is recently written, the map is available, and there is no confusion about the meaning intended by the description. What happens over time is quite a different story. Over time, many of the terms of the description will break down into ambiguity. For example, suppose more grave sites came into being. The palm tree cannot live forever, or worse, another could grow near it. The shipwreck might never be found once it becomes submerged completely. And the X in the sand? Well, few things are less perpetual. As time goes on, it will become increasingly more difficult to find the correct information needed to retrace the description. Even with the map, there may come a day when the treasure is lost forever. That is why a surveyor depends so much on good records. The success of the search is proportional to the effort of the research. In practice, the lion's share of surveying is done off the job site, researching and reading. It would be nice if the task were as simple as our treasure hunt, but surveyors do not follow maps to bury treasure, and X never ever marks the spot. Fortunately, great progress has been made since the days of treasure maps in setting down ways of finding buried objects, or, more to the point for a surveyor, ways of finding a land boundary. However, at least one basic idea of the past remains the same. We continue to use everyday language to uniquely describe the location of a boundary so that it will have the best chance of being found again. A non-ambiguous deed depends upon those important words, uniquely described. Throughout history, disagreements have erupted over the intent of deeds that were thought to be clear when written, but whose meanings became lost over time, particularly in cases where the deed's physical representations, the monuments, have disappeared. With these pitfalls in mind, we stand before the entrance to what is arguably the most involved subject of land surveying, boundary determination, which involves the use of boundary principles. What are boundary principles? They are the rules needed to resolve ambiguities arising from the loss of information not properly perpetuated on paper or on the ground. Many boundary principles to be discussed during the next 2 hours were derived from land disputes brought to the courts for judgment. Among them are those cases where the written terms of a deed conflicted. Others derived from simple interpretations of common and civil law in matters not so much in conflict but in need of a good dose of common sense. Every professional surveyor needs a personal library that includes a reference section on boundary determination. The principles of boundary determination can be found in the books listed in the reference section at the end of the boundary determination unit of your workbook. Your success with the exam will depend to a large extent on your ability to understand and use at least one of these boundary references. Let me proceed now to the story of our surveyors. The setting is a project of ranging complexity, one which contains a storehouse of traps and contradictions, which I will use to demonstrate a multitude of boundary principles. The melodrama begins on a crisp morning in the mountain community of Monument Valley. A fresh survey crew has occupied a random point on a peak overlooking a peaceful river. The party chief pours hot coffee from a thermos and opens his research package for the first time. The information seems friendly enough, an innocent-looking subdivision on the assessor's map. His company has been hired by the Sundance Ranch Partnership to survey their land, known locally as the Sundance Ranch, together with a 60-foot wide road which serves the land. The office researcher has seen fit to provide several documents that will come into play at one time or another. There are 2 maps. The first, a subdivision map recorded by an L. Parker in 1920. The second, an unrecorded plat signed by an L. Baltimore in 1905. The subdivision map shows 9 lots surrounding the Sundance Ranch. Shown is a simplified version of the subdivision map. A little more explanation is going to be helpful. We have the following facts. The original map states that all lines of the subdivision bear at right angles to each other, except the river and highway. Most of the monuments set for the boundary consist of 2x2 redwood stakes, or hubs if you prefer. The rest are iron pins, including the angle points along the sidelines of the 60-foot road, which is dedicated. The lot dimensions are not particularly relevant and are not shown. This map is also a basis of a problem in your companion workbook. The crew's work seems to be cut out for them. All they have to do is find the original corners of the ranch and the 60-foot road leading to it. The party chief dispatches his chainmen to the site of the Sundance Ranch, where they begin to make an inspection for monuments. Nothing is turned up after 2 hours of pacing, compassing, and magnetic searching. And, of course, a great amount of shoveling. Apparently, this subdivision is about as dry as they come. While the chainmen are scratching around fence corners and discovering old beer cans and pieces of barbed wire, the party chief gets down to the basic paperwork. The Sundance Ranch partnership deed is only a few lines long. He fully expects the description to refer to the Sundance Ranch as shown on the subdivision map. Read and weep. The northeasterly 1,250 feet of L. Parker's land in Section 6, excepting the north 700 feet and the east 660 feet, containing an area of 8.45 acres. Suddenly, life has become a lot more difficult. Surprisingly, this deed contains no reference to the subdivision map, although corners for the ranch were set by the subdivider at the time of the subdivision. The shape and location of the Sundance Ranch Partnership land is not controlled by the subdivision map, but by the north and east lines of Parker's land. Once the location of Parker's land is known, the precise location of the Sundance Ranch will follow based upon the rule that
measurements and descriptions based upon the preposition of are made at right angles to the boundary specified unless stated otherwise.
In the graphic shown, Parker's land is depicted ideally with perpendicular north and east lines. It does not matter how acute the angle between Parker's north and east lines might actually be. The right angle rule will ensure that the ranch boundaries distort in kind. Because Parker's deed is called out in the deed to the Sundance Ranch Partnership, Parker's deed becomes a part of the Sundance Ranch Partnership deed. The partnership deed is an example of a nested description, one which refers to at least one prior deed for its full wording. This is typical of meets and bounds descriptions, where nested descriptions are a fact of life. Our party chief should consider himself fortunate if Parker's deed does not refer back to an even earlier deed. His next task is to read the Parker deed. The competent office researcher has done her homework and provided him with a copy. Parker's deed is a document recorded in 1905. The grantor was an M. Cassidy. It reads as follows. All that land in Section 6 described as follows. Beginning at the old sequoia on the hill north of town, thence toward the center of the bridge crossing the river, to an intersection with the north line of said Section 6, and the true point of beginning, thence continuing toward the bridge, 1,700 feet, and so on. This is only the beginning of Parker's description. It continues in a clockwise direction around the apparent boundary of Parker's subdivision. As a natural monument, our party chief realizes that the sequoia tree must be regarded as the irrefutable beginning of the deed. Natural monuments are highest in a hierarchy of evidence used to establish lines upon the ground, with the exception of senior title if it is contrary. The bridge and the sequoia are well-known landmarks in the area. Still, how can he be sure that this is the same tree and bridge that existed at the time of the deed's execution? Locating the center of the bridge may be easier said than done, even for our intrepid crew. There may be some relief, however, in the form of the second of the two maps, the plat drawn by L. Baltimore in 1905, which was not recorded. Baltimore's plat appears to show certain land ownerships that existed at the time of his survey. By the way, the companion workbook involves parties Smith and Jones in a difficulty involving simultaneous conveyances. Like all problems in the workbook, this is typical of test questions found on the professional exam. Unlike the subdivision map, this plat is not a simplified version. Everything is shown that the party chief sees. This means that although monument symbols may be apparent, none of them are described in a legend or labeled on the original map. The party chief notices a monument symbol on the bridge, possibly at the center of the bridge, as it was mentioned in Parker's deed. The apparent midpoint of the bridge appears to be obvious when intersecting its symmetrical head walls. These head walls are old and appear to be the original workings of the bridge. However, the chainman's magnetic locator indicates a distinct signal about 9 feet off the bridge's center, as placed by these head walls. After an hour of chipping through deep asphalt, the party chief's curiosity is satisfied. A 6-inch square iron plate bearing the inscription, Baltimore, 1905, is uncovered. Let's ponder this discovery for a moment. The obvious question is this: does the existence of Baltimore's plat, with its monument symbol at the bridge, force us to accept this monument as the center of the bridge? The party chief realizes that this question carries with it a bundle of liability. He wisely chooses to tip the situation against the following important criterion.
A map must be called for in a legal description to become a legal part of the description.
He therefore concludes that the 6-inch plate cannot be taken as a point of Parker's deed. I would like to further emphasize this criterion by saying that even if Baltimore's disc were to bear the inscription, quote, "This point lies on the southerly prolongation of the east line of the Parker deed," unquote, it would still have to be rejected as the written intent of the deed. The language of a deed is controlled by its written terms, and all terms of the deed are assumed to be present. On the other hand, how certain can anyone be that the center of the bridge is defined by its 4 symmetrical head walls? For all we know, the original parties who transacted the deed may have stood at the old sequoia tree and peered at the bridge through a transit, splitting the 2 northerly head walls. Does this possibility make the meaning of the term center of the bridge ambiguous? When may a surveyor suppose that an ambiguity exists, and when may he not? I'll return to this spicy question a little later under the topic of intent. As to a decision regarding the bridge, our party chief chooses wisely by adopting the center derived by all 4 head walls. With the east line under their belt, our illustrious crew turns its attention to Parker's north line, the other line needed to survey the Sundance Ranch Partnership deed. Parker's north line is the north line of Section 6. But this is not just any Section 6. This one abuts a standard parallel. The party chief recalls from his knowledge of township surveys that the sections north and south of a standard parallel are shifted east or west of each other, depending on the relative location of the meridian. This shift causes separate monuments for sections north and south of the parallel. started, he looks among his research materials for a map showing how the standard parallel was monumented. This map turns out to be a U.S. GLO dependent resurvey plat from 1912. Although not shown, the government surveyor in 1912 set the south line of Section 31 along a curved line of latitude, which is the correct procedure for any parallel, whether it's a standard one or not. That being the case, the south quarter corner of Section 31 would be expected to lie a little to the south of the line connecting the southwest and southeast section corners. Next, he looks at a 1915 U.S. GLO dependent one along a curved line of latitude, which is the correct procedure for any parallel, whether it's a standard one or not. That being the case, the south quarter corner of Section 31 would be expected to lie a little to the south of the line connecting the southwest and southeast section corners. Next, he looks at a 1915 U.S. GLO dependent resurvey plat showing how corners were set for Section 6 to the south. He notes that this plat shows unusual monuments called closing corners at the northwest and northeast corners of Section 6. He and his diligent crew attempt to recover these various corners along the standard parallel. The crew splits up to accelerate the search. The chainman's failure to find the north quarter corner of Section 6 is not surprising. North quarter corners usually were not set for sections south of and abutting standard parallels. The chainperson has better success with two of the corners of Section 31, the south quarter corner and the southeast corner. Unfortunately, the northeast corner of Section 6 is most certainly lost. As the party chief is scratching around for the northeast corner of Section 6, a local resident approaches him, holding an official-looking monument in his hand. The cap on the monument bears the U.S. GLO stamp, date and section designation. The resident explains that a few years ago he witnessed a blade operator hitting this monument. He points to an old tree trunk, against which he says the original corner once stood. The party chief no longer considers the original closing corner to be lost, but merely obliterated. An obliterated corner is defined as a corner that may be reestablished by some form of evidence, accurately indicating its original location, other than the original map or plat. A lost corner is one lacking any such evidence. Original government corners may be restored at the spot indicated by a resident who saw the original corner and knows where its former location was, as long as the knowledge is firsthand. The term obliterated is generally not used for monuments other than government corners, but the same rules of evidence apply for non-government corners as well. In this lesson, the term obliterated can apply to any monument intended to define a boundary. Obliterated corners can be restored by several means. The most common is by using other monuments whose relative locations to the obliterated corner are shown on acceptable plats such as recorded maps. Unrecorded plats of surveyors, and in rare cases, the plats of laypersons, may be used as testaments to the locations of original corners. Always scrutinize such sources carefully, because
a surveyor may accept the work or a plat of another surveyor as evidence for the reestablishment of an obliterated corner, but he must accept the liability for errors and omissions in the work of others he chooses to use.
Obliterated corners may also be recovered by accepting existing monuments that appear to be replacements of originals. These should be thoroughly verified by contacting the surveyor whose registration mark appears on the monument. Should there be no registration mark, as is often the case with old or damaged monuments, there may be no recourse but rejection. Certification of an unidentifiable monument carries risks that are potentially damaging. There are other, even more tenuous means of recovering obliterated monuments. For instance, an improvement built at the time the original monument was known to exist is acceptable if you can prove the original monument controlled the improvement. Lines of possession, such as fences, are particularly controversial. Be especially careful here. Your evidence will need to be strong and may come under very close scrutiny by other surveyors or by the court. This method of recovering obliterated monuments has been greatly abused and is often challenged. Only the courts may decide upon land ownership. This is the fundamental limitation of the land surveyor.
A surveyor locates boundaries according to legal descriptions. The courts, and only the courts, decide ownership and property rights issues.
Unwritten rules of title may apply in similar situations, such as adverse possession, defined by lines of possession. Here the surveyor's obligation to the client is one of disclosure. A surveyor's duty is to map the location of encroachments, such as fences and structures that fall across deed lines, and inform his client in writing as to the facts. Having taken the resident's testimony, our party chief perpetuates the location of the original closing corner in accordance with the Land Surveyors Act by setting his own durable monument, for example, a 2-inch iron pipe with brass disc bearing his registration number. That same resident also mentions that he is aware of the location of the lost north quarter corner of Section 6, premising his knowledge on information given to him by his grandfather. His offer to help is declined. It is explained to him that third-party testimony is considered hearsay and cannot be used to restore monuments.
Any time there is hearsay concerning evidence in a survey, it must be rejected not as a possible fact, but as a legal fact. As a possible fact, it may beg further investigation.
Focusing on the north line of the section, the crew's ties to the 3 available monuments along the standard parallel reveal a discrepancy in their expected alignment. The northeast closing corner of Section 6 is a little over 4 feet south of the standard parallel. Does this cause an angle point in the standard parallel? For the answer to this, our party chief checks directly with the Manual of Instructions. In it he reads, "A closing corner not actually located on the line that was closed upon will determine the direction of the closing line, but not its legal terminus. The correct position is at the true point of intersection of the 2 lines." Incidentally, you shouldn't be going to the test without the Manual of Instructions. Know it thoroughly. Several questions in the workbook will test your ability to navigate for answers deep within the waters of the manual. Our party chief thinks the recovered northeast corner of Section 6 might control Parker's east line as well as his north line. He knows that Parker's deed is not controlled by the section corner, but by the tree bridge line. However, he sees a puzzling coincidence. Baltimore's plat shows a distance of exactly 660 feet from the tree bridge line to the northeast corner of Section 6. This is a familiar distance, exactly 1/8 of a mile, and an incredible coincidence. The party chief suspects there may be a problem with Parker's deed. His next step is to verify the suspicious 660 feet by looking at a certain deed which he happens to have among his research materials. The year was 1895. The grantee and M. Cassidy, who later passed title to Parker. Cassidy's ownership is shown in the graphic and reads as follows. All of Section 6 except the east 1/8, also accepting the west 1/2, also accepting the south 1/2. What remains after the 3 exceptions is simply a portion of the northeast quarter of Section 6, now shown in relation to the river and ranch. The north line of the east 1/8 would, in theory, measure 660 feet. Next, our party chief measures a distance of 710.5 feet from the tree bridge line to the northeast section corner. It is now distinctly possible that Parker did not receive all that Cassidy intended to convey to him. Cassidy may still retain title to that portion of Section 6 between the tree bridge line and the west line of the east 1/8, a gap about 50 feet wide. To confirm this gap, the true breadth of the east 1/8 of the section needs to be determined. Losing sleep over the matter, our tenacious crew decides to recover the entire north line of Section 6. After considerable effort, because the terrain is nasty, they eventually come up with the northwest corner of the section. Well, almost. What they actually find are two original bearing trees, both still standing. They find an oak with its blades still intact, and a dead sycamore near a stream. Each of these witnessed the original position of the 1915 closing corner, which was originally a brass cap in a 4-foot diameter stone mound. The brass cap is gone, and so is the mound. But this corner is only partially lost. The accessory bearing trees are defined as an integral part of the original monument, enabling the closing corner position to be reestablished from the bearing and distance dies provided in the 1915 field notes, shown in the graphic. Like its northeast counterpart, this corner of Section 6 is defined as a closing corner because it is subordinate to the standard parallel. It controls the direction of the west line of the section, but not its northerly terminus. Supposing that the closing corner at the northwest corner of the section is as close to the standard parallel as was the closing corner at the northeast corner of the section, the measured distance between the two closing corners will give the crew enough information to set up an approximate east 1/8 of the section. True? Yes? No? Maybe. The subject of land surveying is full of options and possibilities. Whether the answer is true or false, or something in between, is embodied in the legal definition of the east 1/8 of the section. Certainly we can divide the measured distance by 8, but does the result give us the legal definition of the east 1/8? Also, we have to deal with the fact that we are working in Section 6, everybody's favorite section. A typical Section 6, whether it abuts a standard parallel or not, is subdivided on the government plat into lots, each lot being given a number designation. These lots were never expected to contain exactly 40 acres because they include the excess or deficiency of land in laying out the township. The government plat will show acreages for these lots based upon the field measurements of the original surveyors as they closed into the north and west lines of the township. These closing measurements constitute the fractional parts of the section. The acreages we see on the plat today were originally computed from these fractional parts. Typically, Lot 1 might contain 42.1 acres, Lot 2 44.6 acres, and so on. To derive the side dimensions, a reverse calculation must be done, starting with the areas. In this case, all of this boils down to saying that the north quarter corner should be established at 40 chains proportional to the overall length of the section line. So what does all of this neat Section 6 stuff have to do with the east 1/8 of the section? Nothing, probably. To understand this, we need to know how to define the terms of this legal description. And for that, we need to know whether to apply the distinction between subdividing sections under rules set by the federal manuals or use the criteria of subdivisions under state law. This is a complicated area of boundary determination, often subject to legal opinion and speculation. Suffice it to say that most situations will be covered by the general viewpoint that, for government patents containing descriptions of Lot 1, Lot 2 or 1/16th portions and larger, such as the northeast quarter of the northeast quarter and the south half, the original government plat controls the proportioning of side dimensions to create adequate parts. 1/8 corners are not unheard of as government monuments. However, since there is probably no east 1/8 of a section to be found in the context of government plats, such a portion might be considered a subdivision under state law. If that is the case, the description east 1/8 under California law would probably refer to an area rather than an adequate part. To be absolutely sure of oddly described section designations, never hesitate to search back to the original patent deeds that conveyed the land from the federal government. Actually, in our Section 6 situation, the federal government deeded the entire section as a whole in 1875 to a railroad. The term East 1/8 was invented by private parties later. In the final analysis, our patient field crew does not need to know the precise extent of the East 1/8. However, they should pay attention to the possible theoretical overlap of Parker's subdivision into Cassidy's original land. This raises the question as to the ownership of the overlap.
A subdivider cannot convey land he does not own.
None of the property within this 50-foot overlap, or gaps, depending upon your point of view, was actually subdivided or conveyed with the filing of the subdivision map. The strip remains in the estate of Cassidy, long dead, and only his heirs or successors may pass title now to this area. This does not mean that unwritten means of title transfer have not taken effect, but only the courts can say for sure. The subdivision lines for lots 3 and 4 that run west to east should be terminated at the east line of Parker's original ownership, defined by the Tree Bridge line. The crew is finally ready to lay out the land described in the Sundance Ranch Partnership deed. Refreshing our memory, that deed describes the northeasterly 1,250 feet of Parker's land, excepting the north 700 feet and the east 660 feet. As you might recall, the wording in that deed ended with the extra phrase, containing an area of 8.45 acres. Drawing his calculator from his holster, the party chief assumes roughly perpendicular sides for the ranch and proceeds to take the product of the sides, 550 feet and 590 feet. This yields an area of 7.45 acres, exactly 1 acre less than stated in the deed. A typographical error, our party chief surmises. Or is it?
Mistakes in surveying work, if located with certainty, should be corrected at the place of their occurrence, so they do not adversely influence other portions of the work.
But where is the mistake? Is it the acreage or one of the footages? The party chief now considers the fact that the footages are given as whole numbers, whereas the acreage appears to be the result, erroneous or not, of a calculation based upon the footages.
A general intent yields to a particular intent if there is inconsistency between them.
If we accept the footages as the particular terms, because they are stated as whole numbers, then the area quoted might become the general term because it is derived from computation. Finally, the party chief may settle on what is the most definitive possibility.
Calls for area, unless expressly intended, are the least important element when considering conflicting elements in a description.
Lacking a clearly stated intention, the general problem faced by the surveyor is to decide if there are other possibilities hidden in the wording of descriptions. An acceptable solution can be supported by any number of existing facts, but may be refuted by only one. A surveyor's liability may be avoided by eliminating all possibilities that refute a solution. Our party chief considers the area called out in the deed to be soundly refuted. Accepting the footages as the proper terms of the Sundance Ranch partnership deed, he realizes he is now in a position to search for the corner. While he muses over this, his chairman reminds him that nothing was recovered during the earlier cursory search for monuments within the subdivision. He suggests that Parker's deed, which probably corresponds to the boundary of the subdivision, might be retraced and searched for original subdivision corners on its boundary. Then, the chairman suggests that from these corners on the boundary, the corners inside the subdivision might be found. This reasoning convinces the party chief to run out the rest of Parker's deed. Unfortunately, as we will all realize later, this reasoning should have been considered more carefully. Before we fully explore the dastardly deed of Parker, let's take a break. I'll resume the saga of the Sundance Ranch after these important words from our sponsor.